We now move on to the backbench motion on Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman report on women's state pension age. Patricia Gibson to move.
Have secured this debate today on this very important issue, urging the UK Government to deliver prompt compensation to women born in the 1950s who had their state pension age raised following the report from the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman for the Department of Work and Pensions and their communication of changes to the state pension age for women. And I wish to begin by extending my thanks to the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate. And I want to begin also by lamenting the fact that it won't be possible to push this motion to a vote today, as tellers from both sides of the argument are required for such a vote to be held. And although I am disappointed that there will be no vote on this matter today, there is nothing at all to prevent the Government from bringing such a vote forward in government time. Indeed, the Parliamentary Health and Health Services Ombudsman has invited the House to express a view through laying its report before Parliament. So clearly this is something that really needs to happen. I will indeed.
Address the prejudice that was touched on at the Select Committee, DWP Select Committee last week, namely that there has been an element of contributory negligence in that this was not a state secret, it was advertised, it was covered in the newspapers, and that some women who were approaching retirement or early retirement did not take proper notice. Can she knock that on the head?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that if he reads the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman report, they make it very clear that the action taken to inform women in the appropriate way that one would expect was not taken, and indeed the DWP was negligent in that regard.
Well said.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and she started off powerfully, as I knew she would, knowing what a huge advocate she is for Waspi women. I think that the honourable gentleman's contribution was very helpful there. It is, does she agree with me, ludicrous for anyone at any point to suggest that people, in this case these women, should have found out about a change to their pension arrangements by happening to read advertisements in the correct newspaper on the correct day. None of us should be planning our lives that way, surely.
Indeed, you make my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and we know, do we not, that many women impacted found out at the very last possible moment that their retirement age had been raised because they had not been given due notice to make plans in the way that we would all expect, and the DWP has been found to be negligent. And I'll say more about that in just a moment, Mr Deputy Speaker. The issue before us today goes to the heart of our sense of justice and fairness and the social contract the government of the day has with its citizens. A whole generation of women had their pension age raised without the notice that they are entitled to expect, robbing them not just of tens of thousands of pounds in pension payments, but robbing them of their retirement plans, robbing them of financial peace of mind, robbing them of the contract they believed that they had. They believed that they had with the society in which they worked hard, paid their dues, fulfilled their responsibilities, and in which they thought they could enjoy some sort of retirement in later life. After all, they had earned it, had they not. And this social contract is an agreement we all think we should be able to rely upon. But when you tear at the edges of that contract, when you rip it through as though it never existed at all, then what retirement can any of us, should any of us, count on? I have met with a whole range of women campaigning against this state pension inequality, the Waspi women, over a number of years. And of particular note is the Ayrshire Waspi Group and the Cunningham Waspi Group, who represent Waspi women in my constituency of North Ayrshire and Arran, and indeed Waspi women right across Ayrshire. But all the women in the Waspi movement have distinguished themselves by their very effective campaigning against this gross injustice which has been perpetrated upon them. And they have done so in the face of extreme provocation from a government which has been tone deaf to their pleas for justice. I have been inspired by their dignity, their resilience in the face of great financial hardship, their persistence and indeed the compelling justice of their case. And I know many of the women involved, I know their stories, and I note the hugely helpful insight provided by writer D. Wilde Kearney, author of Not Going Away, who joins us in the public gallery. And Not Going Away is available from all good bookshops. And it outlines, it outlines the struggles of some of the women involved in this campaign. And I pay tribute to Dee for her work in disseminating this injustice to an even wider audience. And I welcome also all the Waspi women who are now in the public gallery, some of whom have travelled considerable distance to be here today. And they are entitled to have their voices heard and their case answered. When a whole generation of women find themselves victims of injustice on such a grand and heartbreaking scale, those MPs who champion their cause feel the weight of their frustrations, the weight of their hardships, and their profound sense of having been screwed over. And in turn, as MPs, we feel our own frustrations when faced with an intransigent government which refuses to listen and appears wilfully blind to the facts. I will indeed.
I'm very grateful to Honourable Friend for giving me on that point of supporting constituents. One of my constituents who we've worked with since 2015 was one of the 6 Ombudsman test cases. And actually, the reason I'm not making a speech in today's debate is because I'm meeting the Ombudsman on behalf of my constituent at 2 p.m. But is she not as frustrated? She is frustrated with the government's lack of action so far. But is she not as disappointed and angry as I am at the Labour Party and their refusal to back the Waspi women, despite promising tens of billions in compensation at the last election?
Just before the Honourable Lady proceeds, there are some 21 members of Parliament who wish to participate in this debate. It's an important subject, I understand that. I have no desire whatsoever to curtail either the debate or the right of honourable members to intervene. And I also appreciate only too well the urgency of getting your own point on the record. But if the front bench or indeed any other member gives way to too many people, not all honourable members will be called. And I think it's important that every honourable member who has their name in seeks to speak. So I hope we can resist, whenever not necessary, the temptation to intervene. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I take on board your comments about interventions. But none of the intransigence of the UK government that we've talked about, none of this has distracted from the dignity with which those campaigners have conducted themselves over the long years this swindle has been carried out, and it is indeed a swindle. And I will go back. My honourable gentleman raised a very good point about our disappointment and some would say disgust at the Labour Party's current position, but I will return to that, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I will, in due course, to respond to my honourable friend's concerns. After years of marching, lobbying, letter writing, email writing, attending surgeries, after years of tireless campaigning, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has finally reported. And that report vindicates the Waspi women. And it highlights the DWP's failure to communicate, which, and I quote, negatively affected complainants' sense of personal autonomy and control over their finances. And that the DWP did not, I quote, and I quote, adequately investigate and respond to complaints, and in a damning condemnation highlighted that the DWP, despite all of this, and I quote again, will not take steps to put things right, and that its refusal to do so was, and I quote again, unacceptable. It concluded that, and if you'll indulge me, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll quote again, Parliament needs now to act swiftly and make sure a compensation scheme is established. We think this will provide women with the quickest remedy. This is surely one of the gravest injustices of our time, alongside the contaminated blood scandal and the Horizon scandal. Another example of citizens having things done to them, which in every measure is wrong and unjust. I will indeed.
I commend my honourable friend for securing today's debate, and on behalf of the Midlothian Waspi women, say thank you to her for all the work she's done and all the other members who have contributed to making sure this debate could happen. But does she not agree with me that the fact that these injustices happen over and over and over again just show how out of touch government has become in this place?
One would be forgiven, Mr Deputy Speaker, for thinking of a real disconnect between those who we seek to serve and those who serve. And when that disconnect repeatedly happens and this systematic failure perpetrates such injustice, then it is a very, very bad day for democracy. But the difference in this case between the contaminated blood scandal and the Horizon scandal, both of which were awful injustices, the difference is that in those particular scandals, the government at least appears to wish to take action, albeit very slowly. It appears to wish to make moves to address these injustices. But in this case of changing the state pension age with little or no notice, with the devastating consequences that has brought about, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has been moved to say, and I quote again, it is extremely rare that an organisation that PHSO investigates does not accept and act on recommendations made. But the PHSO has no legal powers to enforce compliance. A failure to comply with the Ombudsman recommendations represents a constitutional gap in protecting citizens' rights who have been failed by a public body and ensuring access to justice. By laying this report, the PHSO has asked the Parliament to intervene to agree a mechanism for remedy and hold government to account for delivering this. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, here we are. We are holding the government to account, whilst the government and the incoming Labour government enjoy a cosy, do-nothing consensus, sacrificing Waspi women on the bonfire of austerity they have built together in a deliberate and conscious way. Yet, for the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman to issue such a statement is unprecedented. But it illustrates just how shocking it is that this government, supported by the loyal opposition, loyal in ways we could only imagine, appears to be trying to ignore, obfuscate and gaslight its way out of this crisis. And it is a crisis if you are one of the women who has been impacted. Now we are in a situation where neither Labour nor the Tories in government have yet even accepted the principle of financial redress for Waspi women. Not even the principle. How do I know this? Because when the Secretary of State made a statement shortly after the long-awaited publication of this report, he made no mention of redress or compensation, but went on instead to list how great it currently is to be a pensioner in the United Kingdom because of the sheer munificence of the UK government. And the Labour Shadow Secretary of State's response to that statement studiously avoided mentioning compensation as well, instead delivering a patronising yet supine eulogy on treating pensioners with dignity. Empty words don't pay bills, and no one is fooled by that nonsense. But we perhaps should not be too surprised, since Labour has a track record of letting women down, particularly working-class women. After all, It's the Labour administration in Glasgow City Council spent £2.5 million of taxpayers' money fighting equal pay claims by female council workers over 10 years. This shows beyond any reasonable doubt just how far Labour was prepared to go to fight equal pay, an incredible waste of public money. But it took an SNP administration in the council in Glasgow to ensure the legal action was stopped, the pay claims settled, and these were treated as a priority by the incoming SNP administration. So we know that Labour has a track record of denying justice to women, so we can't expect much from that quarter, and anybody who does will be disappointed. However, the Waspi women I have spoken to feel particularly betrayed by Labour MPs and MSPs who have spent the last umpteen years posing for photographs, smiling broadly alongside Waspi campaigners, pledging what turned out to be empty words of support, only to abandon them at the very moment they are vindicated by the Ombudsman. Now, the very debate we are having today, Mr Deputy Speaker, was had in the Scottish Parliament last week. Labour MSPs, who are not just members of the Scottish Parliament, of course, but members of the Scottish Branch Office, they abstained as ordered by their high command bosses in London. And they abstained on a motion. Incredibly, they abstained on a motion which called for a higher level of compensation to properly reflect the financial harm that has been suffered by Waspi women. Now, that motion sounds pretty reasonable to me. It sounds pretty reasonable to anybody. The sums mentioned in the Ombudsman report are simply too low. I think most people would agree that. And it must be considered in the context that the UK government has saved £181.4 billion purely by raising the state pension age of these women. So it's time to get real, and perhaps the UK government could examine the private members' bill brought forward by my colleague for Kilmarnock and Loudon, and perhaps go from there. But instead, all we have is silence from both the UK government and the Labour opposition. But, you know, the leader of the opposition in this House himself has benefited from a special law passed in Parliament. And that law, Mr Deputy Speaker, is called the Pensions Increase, open brackets, Pension Scheme for Keir Starmer QC, close brackets, Regulations 2013. And that relates to when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions in England, where his personal pension is protected. It is quite literally one law for him and another law for everybody else, especially if you're a Waspi woman, and more so if you're a working class woman. And it doesn't escape anyone's notice that the Leader of the Opposition is now very silent on the injustice suffered by Waspi women and supports less generous pensions for everyone else. What a brass neck! What shameful hypocrisy! Maybe he's just so cocksure of a thumping Labour majority at the next election that he thinks Waspi women are expendable. Who knows? Meanwhile, around 280,000 Waspi women who have been impacted have died since the start of the Waspi campaign. Around 6,000 have died since the publication of the Ombudsman report. Why is there no urgency to address this issue, this injustice? No wonder Waspi women's impatience and sense of injustice is fast turning into outright fury. Who could blame them? And because of the evasions and misdirections used in previous debates, I wish to say to the Minister, this is not a debate about returning the retirement age back to 60. This is not a debate about the triple lock. It's not a debate about anything except the injustice suffered by women born in the 1950s who have been vindicated by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. Well, indeed.
Lady for making way, and I think all of us in this room have spoken to our Waspi women. I have Barbara and Lynn from Hartlepool in here today, and they informed me earlier that actually every 13 minutes a 1950s woman dies. So that 280,000 is growing as we speak.
Thank the Honourable Lady for the point that she made, and all she does is emphasise how desperately urgent this matter is. And every 13 minutes, a Waspi woman dies, so how many will die while we're having this debate? Another half dozen, who knows? Yeah. More than that. There are no more hiding places. It is time for swift compensation to be delivered to these women who have already endured far too much hardship and distress. And the redress that they are accorded must reflect that suffering, and there must be no barriers to accessing it for any of the women affected. No one can any longer deny the rightness of their compelling case. It's time to pay up, it's time to deliver. As the Minister and the Labour leadership must surely know by now, these women are not going away. So it is my hope that when the Minister gets to his feet, he will have something meaningful to say to this House today, and all the Waspi women who have already waited too long for justice. Perhaps he can at least set out some kind of time frame when the Government will bring forward redress proposals for those impacted. It is a travesty to drag this injustice out for a moment longer. And I hope the Minister agrees and does the right thing by this generation of women. Or will these women continue to suffer whilst his government pontificates? I hope not. But I will say today to the Minister, and I'll say today to the Waspi women who are here listening both at home and in the public gallery, that the SNP unequivocally stands with you. We will not abandon you as others have done.
Hannah Bardell.
Very much, Mr Speaker. Noted. I firstly want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for North Ayrshire, Nairn. Her opening speech was blistering and brilliant, and I think she speaks for many of our constituents and for those members who cannot be here today. And we have to remember, as other members have said, that Waspi women are not just some distant, transient group. They're real people with real lives. And this injustice has had real impact. Their mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, sisters, aunts, carers, daughters, and many of them have passed away just during the process of us trying to secure justice for them. And I find it remarkable, actually, that the Ombudsman report has got so, and the Ombudsman itself has such little faith in the government that it is turning to Parliament to try and find a resolution and a remedy. And we owe it to those Waspi women. We have taken office, all of us, we have taken an oath of office to our constituents and to those Waspi women to find a resolution and to find a solution, because it has sadly become the business of this government to kick the can down the road on whatever issue it is, whether it's the Horizon scandal, whether it's Primados, whether it's contaminated blood. It seems to have become an ingrained and institutional habit to kick the can down the road and make those who have suffered at the hands of government wait even longer. And I would suggest that, a member opposite made a point about the cost of redress and the cost of remedy. And of course, we have to recognise that. But in doing so, we also have to recognise the money that has been spent by the civil service, the money and time that has been spent just by our constituency staff and all of us. And I would suspect that the amount of money that has been spent on this report and the time is probably almost equal to the money that needs to be paid to bring Waspi women redress. And while we're looking at what remedies we can find and what money can be sought, perhaps we should be looking at proceeds of crime money. Perhaps we should be looking at the Russian oligarchs who need to have their assets seized or have had their assets seized, and proper sanctions against those who launder money and the dirty money that flows through the financial institutions of the United Kingdom. Because I've sat on bills in this House and seen the government take lacklustre approach and action. The money is there. It's about political will, as my honourable friend said. And I have had many representations from the 6,500 Waspi women in my Livingston constituency. And today, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to give them a voice. Constituents like Shirley Sharp, who was born in October 1954. She took early retirement from the Scottish Government in December 2008, she said, when she was 54. Before deciding to leave, she contacted the Pension Service and received her forecast. She said, I knew when I left my job I would receive my pension on the 6th of the 3rd, 2019, when I was 64 years and 6 months old. After I left, another 18 months was added to my pension, which I couldn't make provision for. To add insult to injury, she said, my husband is 8 months older than me and he received his pension 14 months before I did. If it was about equality, why was I penalised 6 months more than a male counterpart? I've been in receipt of my state pension now since the 6th of 9, 2020. I am still very angry about this whole thing, how this whole thing has been handled. Another constituent who didn't want to be named took early retirement from the civil service and looked after elderly relatives for 4 years until 11 months before her 60th birthday. At that point, her sister asked if she was planning on getting a part-time job. She said she was exhausted and she could manage financially as long as she got her pension in 11 months' time. She couldn't believe it when she was told that her pension age would be 66. She thought the DWP were, in her words, pulling her leg. Now, I phoned the DWP who confirmed that, she said, and she'd never had any communication whatsoever. Another constituent, Anne Seenan, she missed out on £14,000, having had her state pension delayed by 2 years. She said, I never received any communication from the Department of Work and Pensions. Another constituent, Diane Risbrigger. Unfortunately, she said, I'm one of the women affected by a chronic, life-limiting illness which adds to the distress, as well as being born a mere 3 weeks after the cut-off date for appealing, so a double whammy in her case. And another constituent who I know is watching, Jill Parton, an incredible woman who I know well. She says, unfortunately, I'm one of the tens of thousands of women born in the 1950s who've been badly affected by the rapid rise in state pension age for women. I worked part-time while I was training to become a teacher and started full-time working in August 1975 when I was 20. I always expected I would receive my state pension at the age of 60. I married in 1977 and worked full-time. She took 6 months off to have both of her children, and her husband and her separated before her son was born. She found out that she wouldn't receive her state pension at 60 during a staff meeting, and she reminded me today that her divorce settlement, like many of our constituents, was predicated on when she was going to get her state pension. She unfortunately also lives with the diagnosis of diffuse corneal dystrophy, and the unpredictability of that meant she couldn't teach because of the impact that teaching under bright lights would have had. She said, I find it very difficult to understand the government's position on this. While they are making tens of thousands of women work until they're 66, we have even more young people who can't get jobs. For the mental health of all concerned, would it not be more economical to allow the 60-plus women to retire and the young jobless to have the jobs of those women? Mental health worries affect many people, and she is deeply concerned about the impact that it will have, and that it has had not just on her, but any others. The bottom line, Mr Deputy Speaker, is this was a social contract between our constituents and the government. And many of these women have suffered great discrimination throughout their lives, have not been able to pay their full stamp, as it was called back in the day, and had no idea. Now, it's not good enough for some to say that communication was adequate. Putting out a press release is not proper communication. And this is something that the government will need to get a grip on and understand the profound impact that it has had on other constituents of mine: Susan Aitken, Cho Atkinson, Shirley Sharp, Elizabeth Donnelly, Linda Howison, Meg Wilson, Marion Wright, Margaret Diamond, Anne Wall, Gloria Fairgrave. I wanted to read their names out because they're real people with real lives, and this is having a real impact on them. If there is one decent thing that this government could do before it's booted out of office, is give the Waspi women the justice that they deserve.
Stephen Bonnar.
Deputy Speaker, can I begin by commending my honourable friend, the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, not only for securing this debate today on the Ombudsman's report, but for her continued determination in representing these women, the Waspi women, and seeking the justice that they have been so cruelly denied by their own government. Women like Mary Bartley from Belsill, who came to my advice surgery just Friday there to ask me to come to this house today and ask this government to do the right thing by her and the thousands of other women who have had the rug pulled out from underneath them. She also spoke to me about some of the 280,000 women who have died during this fight for justice, and how, along with thousands others across my constituency of Coatbridge, Christ and Belsill, she will continue to fight for what they are entitled to. I want to put on record my thanks for Mary and the time that she spent informing me of the real and deep impact that this has had on her in her later life. Across Scotland, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's estimated that almost 356,000 women were impacted by the Waspi pension scandal. Many of the women affected were already in ill health. Others had taken early retirement and were planning to get by until the age of 60 when they thought they would receive their state pension. But Westminster Tories had a different idea. The UK Government instead invented reasons for countless delays in the hope that the Waspi women will simply go away. Well, I think they've proven they will not go away. No chance. Their campaign for justice continues. But I just wish to return to that figure. Some 280,000 women have now passed away without seeing the justice that was owed to them. As many as 40,000 women are dying every year without getting any form of compensation. This is outrageous and willful neglect of a duty of any government. It is actually shameful. It's an absolute betrayal of the most callous kind to those impacted by the UK Government's maladministration. We welcome the findings of the PHSO's report, and it is clear that the Westminster Government must now take responsibility for the hardships that it has caused women born in the 1950s and makes urgent demands for the mistakes made. Waspi women have been struggling for years now with this injustice, and just about every other whim and decision that emanates from this place has also taken its toll. We've heard about the Horizon scandal, the infected blood scandal, but there's also the cut to pension credit for mixed-age couples, the froze the hard-earned state pension of pensioners living overseas, and of course this government scrapped free TV licences for over 75. All of these impacting, of course, on Waspi women, and all of this on top of the self-inflicted cost of living crisis. It is just becoming too much for some of these women. The UK Government must not only apologise for the harms caused by the clear and obvious maladministration, it must now act urgently and deliver the justice and the compensation that these women so richly deserve. Mr Deputy Speaker, the report itself is clear and it is damning. It was made a finding of failings by the DWP in this case and has ruled that the women affected are owed compensation. And the PHSO's Chief Executive, Rebecca Hilser-Narf, said that the DWP has clearly indicated that it will refuse to comply. This is outrageous. It is totally unacceptable. The Department must do the right thing and it must be held to account for the failure to do so. To this very day, the DWP have not acknowledged its failings, and it has also failed to offer any apology or any explanation, and has indicated that it will not compensate women affected by its failure. The SNP here in Westminster and in Government in Holyrood have always supported and will continue to support the Waspi women in their valiant efforts. Yet many here in Westminster who have previously been very vocal in supporting the Waspi women have now fallen eerily silent. The very same can be said for prominent Tory and Labour figures up the road in Holyrood as well. And on the 1st of May, the Scottish Parliament moved a motion on women's state pension compensation, which, I quote, agreed that the UK Government must now urgently deliver on the Ombudsman's recommendations to pay compensation in full to those women without delay. Now, that motion passed in the Scottish Parliament, passed by votes from the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Greens and the Labour Party. The Tories and the Labour Party shamefully abstained on that vote, and I think that speaks volumes. It speaks a lot more than the silence that comes from those benches. And I have to say, If the Waspi women are pinning their hopes on an incoming Labour administration, they probably need to prepare themselves for yet more despair. Why? Why is that? Well, they only need to look and familiarise themselves at the lens that the Labour administration in North Lanarkshire Council went to avoid paying out on equal pay claims owed to women over many, many years, spending millions upon millions of pounds in the process and legal fees to fight these justified claims, and then losing. The same happened, as we've heard, in Labour-run Glasgow City Council. These two parties are not interested in equality for women. The evidence is before us, friends. So forgive me if I have no faith whatsoever in the change that the Labour Party are purporting to offer. They could, of course, surprise us. They could support the State Pension Age Compensation Bill in the name of my honourable friend from Kilmarnock and Loudoun, of which I am a co-sponsor. The UK Government and the Labour Party could and they should back his bill and immediately set up a compensation scheme for all those women affected. We know that they won't, but we're asking them here today. We're reinforcing those calls. And it is clear that only a strong SNP voice in Holyrood and here in Westminster can hold this UK Government to account, whether that any Westminster Government to account, whether it be a Tory or a Labour-led government. Of course I will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. We've heard demands that the Secretary of State here should apologise, and quite clearly they should. But he will remember that 10 years ago, almost to this day, a very senior former Labour Prime Minister was doing rounds in Scotland, speaking at meetings of middle-aged and elderly people, promising them categorically their pensions were safe with any United Kingdom government. Does my honourable friend believe that it is now time that an apology came from that politician for the way that he deceived and misled millions of people in Scotland?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He makes an excellent point. It wasn't one of the mistruths that were promised during that campaign. Of course, we were told we would retain our place in the European Union as well. But these women have completely been shafted, for want of a better term, by these politicians who were charged with delivering justice for them. And I think he's made an excellent point here today. We, the SNP, the Scottish Government in Holyrood, stands ready to engage with the Department of Work and Pensions when the UK Government finally agrees to compensate these Waspi women. And we still hope that this government will agree to compensate these women, because justice should be done. After years of promises made by Tory MPs, Labour MPs and MSPs, those parties are both now refusing to accept the report's recommendation to fully compensate these women who have been impacted. It is time for the Tory and Labour Party to stop dithering, to put the funding in place so that these women can get the justice they deserve before it is too late. And it should also be crystal clear once again. And this is not an extreme proposition, and it should not be seen as such. But the only way to protect Scotland's pensioners from the whims of Westminster governments and to ensure dignity and fairness in retirement is for Scotland to have the full powers of its independence.
John Healey.
Sorry. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend from North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate today, and also for the backbench business for granting the debate. It's my privilege to speak on behalf of Waspi women, and in particular the Falkirk Waspi women group, who have been with me for quite a long time now. Mr Deputy Speaker, I held a public meeting in my Falkirk constituency way back in 2015 for all the Waspi women, approximately 7,000 affected by the state pension age, the change, and discovered that many, the overwhelming majority of them who attended, hadn't received any notification of these changes. The majority of the women were only 1 year away from the original retirement age of 60 years and now faced a further 6 years of working life without any warning. Many had already started to make plans to retire due to ill health, caring duties for grandchildren and or elderly parents. It wasn't just the women who were badly affected by these changes, but family members who had also to make changes in or other arrangements in their life. Mr Deputy Speaker, a cohort of the Falkirk women got together and formed the Falkirk Group in 2016 and made arrangements to join the very first demo in June 16 down here in London. Since then, they have participated in other demos, both here and in Scotland. And in 2019, they published and produced a calendar where all the proceeds went to breast cancer research. Deputy Speaker, Local Coordinator Anne Campbell and myself have had many discussions and meetings regarding this issue, along with other stalwarts of the group, namely May Roots, Mag Burns, Lorna Binney, Sheila Hartness, Elizabeth Lumsden, Maureen MacLeod, Valerie Sutter, Ruth McIntosh, Helen Reader, May Farrell, Elspeth Slater, and the many, many more women campaigning on this total injustice. And I pay tribute to them all. The Falkirk women are very positive. They are strong in their endeavour to right this wrong that was hoisted upon them in the most cruelest and calculating way. And I praise them for their organisational skills and the rest of the Waspi women. They would like an apology and compensation for the turmoil that was thrust upon them. They want respect and dignity and, most importantly, a fair and a fast compensation scheme to redress this injustice. And it is fair to say that these women are not going away, so ignore them at your peril. These Waspi women need an answer. They need it now. No more unnecessary delays. This present government can and it should resolve this pitiful state of affairs here and now. Do the right and proper thing and put an end to this bureaucratic shambles. The government can't procrastinate any longer. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, action is required, not more words. Stop insulting these Waspi women any further and compensate them now with speed and with simplicity. Thank you.
Dorans.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. May I also thank the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate and for her unflinching commitment and support for Waspi women everywhere. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is an important issue for me and has been for a number of years. In fact, so important that I chose to raise it as a matter of urgency during my maiden speech in this chamber in 2020, and I highlighted the scandalous situation experienced by these women. Mr Deputy Speaker, there were an estimated 3.8 Waspi women, although 280,000 have since died since the start of this campaign, including my constituents, Margaret Meikle and Morag Syme, who died without receiving the compensation, apology or justice they rightly deserved. There are about 6,800 Waspi women in my Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock constituency, and to some people, these are just numbers. To me, every single one of them is an individual, a daughter, possibly a mother, a grandmother, a wife, a sister, an auntie, a carer and a friend. They are important. They matter.
Hear, hear.
They have all had their hopes, expectations and aspirations of retiring at 60 with a reasonable pension crushed by the lack of notice in the change of their pension age by the government. Each and every one of them deserve to be treated properly and this grave injustice suffered by them put right by the government. Since my first contact with a Waspi constituent 9 years ago, many have written to me and met with me expressing their frustration, their burnout by caring for elderly relatives, having missed out on time with their partners and grandchildren and children, and facing all of that in the context of a cost of living crisis. Many have also commented on lack of pension income and having to use savings to survive, preventing them from buying clothes and presents for their grandchildren, and seriously restricting any discretionary spending which would have been spent in the local economy. But above all, Mr Deputy Speaker, they are left with an overwhelming sense of injustice, of not being informed of the changes in their state pension age, and has left them understandably angry and resentful. The lack of information, denial of choices by the government has resulted in a reduced quality of life, serious financial losses and sustained damage to their sense of worth, mental health and well-being. Mr Deputy Speaker, how much might it cost to properly compensate the Waspi women? The Waspi campaign... Yes.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's mentioned the enormous toll on the mental health and well-being of so many of these women. Does he agree with me that that damage has been deliberately made worse by the fact that they, almost alone, of the millions of people who have suffered from grave injustices and miscarriages of justice, they almost alone have the government that claims to be looking after them publicly say, we are going to ignore the results of an independent inquiry, we are going to deny the fact that there has even been any misjustice carried out against them?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I totally agree with him, and I couldn't agree more. Mr Deputy Speaker, how much might it cost to properly compensate the Waspi women? In March, the Times estimated that to pay Waspi women the Ombudsman's paltry offer of between £1,000 and £2,950 would cost between 3.5 and 10 million. The Waspi campaign is calling for around 3 times as much, £10,000, so that would put the cost at about 36 billion. The cost to the public purse would be around about 36 billion, slightly more, slightly less. However, by not paying the Waspi women their pensions to date, the government have already saved 181.4 billion by not paying the rightly deserved pensions. In only the last 8 months of 2023, according to the Office of National Statistics, the UK government total expenditure was 755 billion. The compensation demanded by the Wasp women is insignificant in that context. The failed COVID test and trace system in England has cost 37 billion, paid to former Talk Chief Executive and wife of Conservative Lord Dido Harding for no reason whatsoever. That alone would have paid full compensation to all the Waspi women to date. Mr Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, as many as 3.8 million women were given the news that their state pension age was going to increase from 60 to 66 just as they were about to retire. Too late for them to do any proper financial planning. Many were already in ill health or worse, and others are taking early retirement or are planning to get by until age 60 when they thought they would receive their state pension and look forward to a reasonably comfortable retirement. This is a long, long tail of suffering, misery and injustice, not only for the women affected, but endured by their immediate and extended families. It has been allowed to go on for far too long. It needs to be concluded without further delay. I therefore call upon the Government to apologise unreservedly and to act to compensate women affected by the worst pension scandal in history, and to do so immediately before even more Waspi women die without having received an apology, compensation or justice. I also urge the DWP to bring forward the proposals for a financial redress scheme in Parliament for all members to debate and vote upon, including a mechanism for MPs to put forward alternatives before the summer parliamentary recess. The Government should also set out within their proposals the eligibility for the compensation scheme, the amounts of compensation to be paid under the scheme, the administration of the compensation scheme and the time frame for compensation to be paid. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, Waspi women everywhere have campaigned to right this injustice, but locally may I pay tribute to the tireless work of Frances Brown and Lynn Patterson, the local Waspi coordinators from my area, who have given their best, their lives to obtain compensation for all the other Waspi women in our area and across the country, and I thank them for their support. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a considerable pleasure to follow my honourable friend for Easington. We've worked together over many issues over the years. And I have to say, I remember the debate that he talked about in Westminster Hall, and I can remember the revulsion when it was said that 1950s women, Waspi women, should go on apprenticeship schemes. And I'm delighted that my honourable friend for Ayrshire North and the Backbench Business Committee have resulted in us having this debate today. Mr Speaker, it is worth reflecting that the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has asked Parliament to find a remedy for the Waspi women who have suffered injustice, given that the Ombudsman strongly doubts that the DWP will provide a remedy. Let's just consider this. The Ombudsman has proclaimed that maladministration has taken place. Mr Deputy Speaker, under these circumstances, it would be fair to expect that the DWP would accept its moral, its ethical responsibility on behalf of the women affected, on behalf of their elected parliamentarians, and would bring forward effective remedies for this maladministration. Now, of course, the report was published just a couple of months ago, but we had the interim report 3 years ago. This isn't a surprise to any of us here. The government knew this day was coming, and the government must now act with haste to make sure that they bring forward remedies for the Waspi women. Mr Deputy Speaker, government, if it's meant to be anything, is supposed to be rooted in fairness, recognising its duty to citizens, and when a judgment has been made about maladministration, responding in an appropriate and timely manner. It is a damning indictment that the Ombudsman has no faith in the government to provide a remedy, and has therefore taken the unprecedented step of asking Parliament, our Parliament, to intervene. Meaning that we as parliamentarians, all of us, in effect, must do the government's job for it. And right across this chamber, we have to rise collectively to that challenge. All of us here, every single member of Parliament, has a responsibility to their own constituents, many of whom will be looking at us today, whether in the gallery or on televisions, waiting for us to take action. We can't have any more procrastination. We need to make sure that we take action. Let us remind ourselves that there were 3.8 million Waspi women, 1950s-born women, that were affected by changes to the state pensioned age, who suffered from poor communication, which adversely affected the life choices that they were forced to make. This must be resolved by this Parliament. It must not be kicked down the road until after the election. The SNP Westminster Group commissioned a report on potential financial remedies for Waspi women, which presented to the UK Government as far back as June 2016. Sadly, it was ignored. It was produced by Landman Economics. If they needed some advice, then perhaps they might want to turn to them as well. But, of course, Parliament has debated this issue many times in this chamber, in Westminster Hall, the work of the APPG, which should be commended. I actually opened an SNP opposition day on this issue on the 29th of November 2017, and it was a motion calling on the government to improve transitional arrangements for women born on or after the 6th of April 1951 who were adversely affected by the acceleration of the increase in state pension ages. On that day, there was a vote at the end of the debate. 288 members voted for that motion, with none against it. It was done on a cross-party basis. There were 5 Conservative members who voted for the motion. If the Tory government had accepted that proposition then, that instruction from this House, we wouldn't be here now. Why did the government ignore that instruction from Parliament way back in 2017? I will happily give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. And does he not think that that is unfortunately and very regrettably typical of the attitude of this UK government to these Waspi women? They hope that they will simply go away if they're ignored. It's heaping insult on top of indignity. It's wholly unacceptable, and constituents like mine, whose lives have been destroyed by this government's inability to look and see what needs to be done, these people really deserve so much better from the UK government.
Of course they do. And the point is, you know, we've heard today from so many members right across the House, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, in some cases more, Waspi women in every constituency. We all have had the heartbreaking stories of those that simply couldn't afford to carry on working, that weren't given adequate notice about the increase of their pension age. It was an injustice, and it needs to be dealt with. And let me also say, this was never, ever about the equalisation of men's and women's pensionable age. We all accept that there had to be an equalisation of men's pensionable age, but some of us will remember the review that took place in pensions in 2016, the Cridland review. And Cridland said that there should be no more than a 1-year increase and anyone's pensionable age in every decade. It was the pace of the increase in women's pensionable age that was the problem. And let's us remember that this was about women who paid national insurance on anticipation of receiving a pension, who were hit with a bombshell that their pension was being deferred, and in many cases by up to 6 years. 6 years, Mr Deputy Speaker, with only, in some cases, 15 months written notice. Mr Deputy Speaker, a state pension should be seen as a right. But the government changed the terms and conditions of that right without consulting those that were due to be paid that pension. Some time ago, thanks to Freedom of Information requests, we learned that the Department of Work and Pensions only began writing to women born between April 1950 and April 1955 in April 2009 and did not complete the process to February 2012. So, despite the need to inform women about the changes to legislation that goes back to 1995, this government did not start the formal notification period for 14 years. 14 years after the legislation.
Outrageous.
What were they doing? Where was the responsibility to the women affected? Taking 14 years to begin informing women that a pension that they had paid into was being deferred is quite something. Can we imagine the outcry if a private pension provider was behaving in such a way? There would be an outcry in this House, and no doubt there would be legal action. When we consider that that entitlement to a state pension is earned through national insurance contributions, with many women making contributions for over 40 years, it is quite staggering. A woman born on April the 6th, 1953, who under the previous legislation would have retired on the 6th of April 2013, would have received a letter from the DWP in January 2012 with the bombshell that she would not be retiring until July 2016. Just think about that. Think about receiving a letter. You think you're on the verge of retirement and the rug has been pulled from under you. No wonder there is a need to pay compensation to those affected. That is 3 years and 3 months later than such an individual might have expected, and with just 15 months' notice. 15 months' notice in what she thought was a contract she had with the government was simply ripped up. The implication of all of this had left women with no time to put in alternative plans, despite many having looked forward to imminent retirement. Then we have the issue of supposedly phasing this in gradually. What we were dealing with was an increase of women's pensionable age by 3 months for each calendar month that passed. It was simply scandalous that a woman's pensionable age was rising so rapidly. That was the issue. That is why today we have the moral duty to immediately correct a wrong. This has gone on for too long. As has been said, sadly, since the Waspi campaign started, 288,000 Waspi women have died. Another dies every 13 minutes. A number have died while we have been in this debate this afternoon, no doubt. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have the Ombudsman's report. We have to put in place remedies now. The DWP has to play a part in bringing forward proposals for a financial redress scheme to Parliament before the summer recess, and these proposals must be amendable. Most importantly, any process must clear the parliamentary process before the summer recess. We do not have long. We have less than 9 weeks, Mr Deputy Speaker, of parliamentary time before recess. This means within days, Minister, and I have respect for the Minister as she knows, the DWP must come forward with proposals. Will the Minister respond appropriately to this demand? It is now nearly 2 months since the Ombudsman's report. We cannot wait any longer. So many of the Waspi women who have suffered as a result of this maladministration should have received financial remedy, and that is why we now must take action. And this must not be a party political matter. It ought to be about all of us recognising a wrong which needs to be righted. And I appeal to members right across the chamber to recognise our responsibility, to do the right thing. Let's make sure that the Waspi women get an apology and they get compensation.
Hear, hear.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my good friend and honourable comrade from Islington North, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing and leading this debate, and started off with, I thought, some very harsh truths that had to be heard, including the simple fact we would not be here debating this today if the government had allocated their own time to discuss this report and discuss how we go forward. And that's exactly what should have happened. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm starting to get good at this game of anticipating what is in the government's pre-prepared text. And I'm no doubt we will be told that these pension changes were in the great cause of equality. That if you punish people equally, that's great strides towards equality. But the simple and brutal dynamic is this, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that women born in the 1950s have been discriminated against throughout their whole lives. That starts off with growing up and not having a chequebook unless they get the express permission of their father or their husband, not being able to hire a television, for example, in those days, unless they had the express permission of their father or their husband, the expectation, Mr Deputy Speaker, that if they fell pregnant, that they were to leave their employment, the expectation that they would have to give up their careers to raise children, and as my honourable friend from Livingston had said earlier, that if they were divorced, the expectation on a financial settlement would be their pensionable rights would be there at the age of 60. So this discrimination of 1950s born women has been going on for a long time. And then to say to them, some are people who have had very little notice, as if it's some sort of episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. We don't want to give you that. We want you to work an additional 6 years, all in the name of equality, is frankly ludicrous. And we need to recognise that for many 1950s born women, these were the injustices and the discrimination that they have suffered throughout their whole lives. And we need to start recognising that this was not some magical equality formula. It was to make women work longer. And I think we need to have a serious debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, that there is a huge difference between someone's working age expectancy and someone's life expectancy, because they are two entirely different things, particularly for those women who work in huge physical tasks, like, for example, the care sector, the NH sector, and I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he's making a very important point. And I want to go back to the Cridland report, because I remember meeting Cridland at the time, and this very issue about healthy life expectancy, and to be told that the DWP didn't hold such information, because that was the responsibility of the Health Department, just shows you the dysfunctionality and the lack of concern about people's healthy life.
Honourable friend for that, and he is right. You would think there was. I've always been told there's joined up government in here, but so many occasions. Yes, I've been told. But well, I'm often told by that side that there's joined up government, but all too often, I think those of us in these collective benches, I sometimes find that meets us with the surprise and the quizzical look that I got from the Labour front bench when I had said that there was joined up government in here. And but my right honourable friend is correct. We need to consider these things going forward, because someone who works in a physical environment, particularly women, as I said, in the care sector, for example, the NHS or any other line of work, will not be able to work till they're 66. That is just a brutal dynamic. And a number of colleagues, my good friend from Easington and my right honourable friend from Rossguy and Lochaber, made mention of the former Pensions Minister who rose to his feet at that great Westminster Hall debate, which was packed to the rafters, and told us all that one of the solutions was that women could apply for an apprenticeship in a new phase of the economy. That was the most ludicrous comments that I've heard. And I've heard many ludicrous comments in the time I've been here, Mr Deputy Speaker, but that was number one on the list, I have to say. Mr Deputy Speaker, I do want to pay tribute to the Waspi, Glasgow and Lanarkshire group campaigners, particularly the great Cathy McDonald and Rosie Dixon, who have campaigned rigorously and vigorously over these last few years, including the times when, after the 2019 election, when many people thought that this was an issue that had been concluded, was finished and wasn't getting anywhere. And can I say that those Waspi campaigners, those 1950s born women who have campaigned consistently on this issue for the last 5 years in particular, should be commended in this House. Because this Parliament is going to have to grapple. Next week we're going to be discussing the report on infected blood. We've got a piece of legislation, rightly so, for the postmasters, and we have this issue. And I agree with everyone who's spoken so far that we need to conclude this matter before the summer recess, so that we can all say as a Parliament that that's the cost, that we all accept the cost, and then we can debate matters going forward. Because I'm very clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, that justice for the 1950s born women, or the infected blood community, or those postmasters, should not be the result, and they should not be blamed for a lack of public investment going forward, or lack of investment in public infrastructure. This country badly needs those things, and so we should not use these wonderful campaigners as an excuse to do so. Now, I mentioned the great Rosie Dixon, Madam Deputy Speaker, who contacted me earlier with a quote from perhaps one of my favourite political philosophers. A political philosopher, Mr Deputy Speaker, who hailed from Govan in the Glasgow South West constituency, the great Jimmy Reid. And Jimmy Reid's, one of his famous quotes is, "From the very depth of my being, I challenge the right of any man or any group of men in business or in government to tell a fellow human being that he or she is expendable." The views of many 1950s born women is that this government has viewed them as expendable. And I want to send a message clearly in this House on their behalf, as many others have today. They are not expendable. They deserve justice. And if justice is delayed, the price tag is going to go up. And I hope the government recognise that. And I hope that the ministers are going to confirm today that we're going to see action on this and justice for those wonderful, brave 1950s born women.
Stuart C McDonald.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure as ever to follow another expert speech from the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington. But can I also start by commending my honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Arden for securing the debate, and indeed my honourable friend for Kilmarnock and Loudon for taking forward his bill. Both are real Waspi champions, and can I just say I think they make a fierce campaigning duo there on the front bench. But Mr Deputy Speaker, the state pension is relied upon by more than 12 million of our citizens at the moment. Certainty about when you'll be able to claim it is absolutely pivotal for many more who are planning retirement and making huge decisions based upon that date. But we know now that when changes to pensions impacting upon 1950s born women were being implemented, those changes were not communicated properly. Many received no direct communication at all. Others found out what was to happen too late, having already made major decisions that they would not otherwise have made had they known the changes that were ahead. So communicating changes to the state pension must be done well in advance and using all means possible. That did not happen with the Waspi women. And that is the nub of what the Ombudsman has found, and that is what government has to acknowledge today. And as the Ombudsman has said, an apology is due and compensation is owed. Parliament has been asked to take lead on this, and so the first and the most important point that I think members have been making unanimously today is that government must hurry up and deliver, because it already has been a long and arduous road to justice for the Waspi women, far, far too long. And as has been noted, tragically, too many won't get to the end of that road with us. Once again, I want to pay particular tribute to my constituent June Miller, a key figure in establishing our Cumbernauld Waspi group. It was an honour to work alongside her and the local team as they were establishing their campaign group, hosting public meetings and running Waspi surgeries. June marched outside Parliament with her Waspi colleagues from across the UK back in October of 2018. She made the case forcefully, eloquently and patiently, typically of the Waspi campaign, and it is heartbreaking that June is one of over 280,000 Waspi women to have died during the lifetime of this campaign. And that is exactly why the most important message that we're conveying today is that the government must move swiftly. The Work and Pensions Committee are absolutely right. Let's have proposals before the summer, and as has been said now a couple of times, these proposals must be amenable to amendment by MPs, because it's Parliament that has been specifically tasked with this task, not just government and not just ministers. And others have said as well, there is no excuse. Government should have seen this coming months and years ago. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the big point of contention, I suspect, is clearly the level of compensation. While the Ombudsman spoke of level 4 compensation, I think most of us know that only reflects only the handful of cases PHSO has looked at, and almost certainly not the range of experiences faced by Waspi women as a whole. My own view is that the level of compensation simply feels significantly understated and not a fair reflection of the impact that the maladministration had on many of my constituents, and I know lots of honourable members will feel the same way. So I therefore also join others in commending the work of the all-party parliamentary group who have put forward the argument that fair compensation means level 6 compensation because of the profound, devastating or irreversible impacts that these changes have had. In particular, the point that this has gone way beyond financial impact and caused extraordinary emotional, physical and psychological distress is consistent with the experience of Waspi women in Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. I also think there is considerable merit in a system that allows for higher payments to those who suffered the shortest notice and faced the longest delays until their state pension age. And I support the contention that there will be Waspi cases that have not been examined by the Ombudsman where compensation for direct financial loss is absolutely appropriate. But again, what is important is speed. So a general payment for the lack of notice should not be delayed. But thereafter, I don't see why claims for additional awards for direct loss couldn't also then be proceeded with and considered. In this, there would be a parallel with the Windrush scheme, where concerns about how slow decision-making was led to pressure from the Home Affairs Committee for provisional or interim payments to claimants, and thankfully that was implemented. So I think it is possible to have speedy payments for all, and thereafter to go on and have detailed consideration of individual claimants at the same time. Another, perhaps even more important lesson from Windrush that I don't think really has been mentioned today is also surely it would be wise for the compensation scheme to be run independently of the DWP, preferably independently of government altogether. That is surely sensible if people are to have faith in it, particularly when the department is proving so reluctant even to recognise it's done anything wrong at all. The perception of a lack of independence of the Windrush compensation scheme, I think, certainly hindered it and undermines people's confidence in coming forward to claim from it, so I think we should learn a lesson from that. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on another day we need to come back to the issue about why it has taken so long to get here. And I don't mean any of this as a criticism of the Ombudsman or the staff there, rather it's more to do with the resources that are available to them and the parameters in which they have to work. But whether it has been Waspi or Windrush or Horizon or Inflected Blood or any other sort of recent scandal, time and again, the mechanisms for putting right injustice and government maladministration seem to have been slow and sometimes even more of a hindrance than a help. So we need to revisit and overhaul how such failings are examined and remedied. Because as we've heard, justice delayed is justice denied, and that has certainly been the case for too many Waspi women. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, our constituents are not asking the earth, and they never have. They're quite realistic about what can and cannot be done, and now they have the backing of the Ombudsman. The government needs to recognise, to apologise and to compensate, and more than anything, it needs to do this urgently.
Hear, hear.
SNP spokesman, Allan Dorans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford. And like everybody else, I would like to commend my friend, the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran, for securing this debate and for all the work she's done speaking up for the 3.8 million effective women all those years. Now, I would also like to commend all the others that have spoke in this debate today. It's been powerful speeches and powerful but unfortunately harrowing stories about how various constituents have been affected by these increases in state pension age for women. Now, there is backbench consensus today that the Government has dragged its heels. A response is long overdue now and that compensation is due. We've also disabused the nonsense that women should have known about increases in state pension age. Financial advisers didn't even know. Lawyers didn't even know. As my honourable friend for Livingston said, divorces were granted on the basis of women accessing pensions at age 60. Now, some Labour backbenchers today, Madam Deputy Speaker, rightly criticised the Government for the lack of actions and for their policies elsewhere, but then somehow bristled at the SNP speakers calling out the silence of their own front bench. Now, we are willing to work cross-party, but we also need to pressure for action. If we don't call out what we think is wrongdoings, then we're not doing the right thing for the Waspi women that we're all here to represent today.
Hear, hear.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we wouldn't actually be in this chamber today debating this as parliamentarians if it was not for the fantastic campaigners such as the Ayrshire Waspi Group, Cunning Waspi Group, my constituency, Waspi Scotland and of course the wider Waspi organisation. And I pay tribute to my constituent Anne Hamill, who brought it to my attention in my early period as an MP in 2015. And again, it was heartening to hear so many MPs also commend their local campaigners. Now, in terms of the Ombudsman report, there are a few key aspects. The findings and confirmation of maladministration of DWP, compensation to be paid and government failures. And I want to explore these in turn. Now, it's clear the Ombudsman has not only confirmed they believe that the DWP was guilty of maladministration, but expressed an outright anger at the belligerence of the DWP and therefore, by default, this Tory government. And I welcome the robust comments of the Ombudsman Chief Executive, Rebecca Hillingsrath, who stated, "The UK's National Ombudsman has made a finding of failings by the DWP in this case and has ruled that women affected are owed compensation. DWP has clearly indicated that it will refuse to comply. This is unacceptable." Now, I agree with her. It beggars belief that in 2024 the Government is suddenly pretending this Ombudsman report is a bolt out of the blue and very complex. It's 3 years since the Ombudsman found that the DWP was guilty of maladministration regards communication or lack of regards the increase in state pension age. And it's scandalous that the Ombudsman is actually having to ask Parliament to find a way to create a mechanism to provide compensation for those affected. Now, the Ombudsman does not trust the UK Government to do the right thing, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not trust him either. And unfortunately, at this moment, I do not trust the official opposition either, who have been too quiet in the report findings to date. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is why I brought forward my private member's bill that sets out a compensation framework. Now, we need to remember the current Prime Minister was the Chancellor who boasted about setting up the furlough scheme in a couple of weeks for COVID lockdown. So clearly, if there's a government will, there's a way. So why doesn't the government have the will to go on and do a compensation scheme for the Waspi women? And when we consider the compensation level set in the Ombudsman report of just level 4, then unfortunately this feels wrong. And for the majority of the 3.8 million affected women, it also feels like a slap in the face. Compensation levels of between £1,000 and £2,950 is inadequate in terms of maximum payouts. The Waspi APPG recommended level 6 for the worst affected, and my private member's bill is similar. I have suggested a framework with a clear logic that those affected by the biggest increase in state pension age, while effectively having the shortest notice period, will receive the highest compensation. For the 2.5 million women who have had to wait 5 years or more to access their pension, then it would be absurd just to award them level 4 type compensation of less than £3,000. In my framework, these women will be allocated compensation at PHSO level 6, which is circa £10,000. Those who did not have to wait quite as long, they'll still badly affect. In some cases, we get levels 4 and 5, with a majority on lower scales. And I thank members across the House that have actually signed my private member's bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's now 9 years that this subject has been debated in Parliament, and clearly over 9 years that these women and their families have been fighting for justice. And sadly, it's been repeated many times, but women are dying at a rate of 40,000 a year, or one Waspi woman every 13 minutes. That is tragic when this is happening and they're not getting the justice that they deserve. And this underlines the criticality of the need for action now by Parliament. However, there's not even been a suggestion about the way forward with the official opposition. They should be putting proposals to the government, saying what they would do if in government. And if their solution is accepted by the government, then they can claim credit and get the compensation over the line. But instead, we've had nothing, zip, some weasel words about listening. So hopefully the Shadow Minister will change my mind on that with proposals when she sums up after me. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a bad example, last week in the Scottish Parliament, Labour MPs sat in their hands on the issue of voting for compensation for the Waspi women. That was after they had the temerity to get their photographs taken with the campaigners, seeing how they backed the campaigners, then went into the chamber in Holyrood and sat in their hands and actively abstained. It was disgraceful. Now, as I say, hopefully the Shadow Minister will bring forward some proposals, but for her and for the Minister that's going to be responding, I'd just like them to consider the constituent stories we've heard today, and so a couple of mine as well. Lynn, exhausted after working for 34 years in the NHS, agreeing early retirement at 55, finding out on her last day at work it would be 11 years before she got state pension and not the 5 she anticipated. Nancy, widowed at age 54 while she's working part-time, which was clearly traumatic emotionally and financially. She suffered umpteen chronic health conditions while caring for parents, but then was forced to take NHS bank work just to survive. Leslie, sometimes working 3 jobs to make ends meet. A carer for a partner when he had cancer, a carer for her dad when he had cancer, and then a period of travelling to Southampton every weekend to visit her aunt. Superwoman efforts would exhaust anybody, and it was little wonder she took early retirement aged 56, only later to discover she would then have to wait an extra 6 years longer than she thought to access her pension. So don't dare tell these women and others like them they need to wait longer for justice. This is women that didn't have maternity rights back in the day, who are paid less than men, who are more likely to work part-time, and whose private pensions were smaller if they had them, and so the pension age equalisation has in reality further prejudiced these women. Especially when they're told to get the full pension, they had to pay extra NI contributions. It's really time the right thing is done, and that right thing is fair and fast compensation now.
Here.